Exactly. I think we've just dropped into the live session now, Lavinia. So,
Yes.
for those of you that have already joined us, great to have you here. Do you want to drop where you're joining us from, what the weather's like, and what mood you're in today? Maybe might be a fun place for people to start the conversation. Lavinia and I will keep having a bit of a chat whilst you're coming in. And Lavinia, you were saying earlier you literally just got back to Bucharest after doing your Offbeat fest in London, right?
Yes. Yes, exactly. I landed last night. We had our conference on Monday and Tuesday in London. It was yeah, great fun.
Nice, good to hear. And so, what was the kind of what were there some themes that were coming out? I think very human focus from what I saw from the socials. I obviously couldn't make it myself. I was actually on holiday, but yeah,
Yeah. Yes, it's a very informal setup, I would say, and that's what we were looking for. We have it in a former brewery in London, so interesting, how do you design an informal setup where very serious things are actually discussed because we discussed everything from measuring L&D impact and AI adoption and behavior change and yeah, really hard topics actually. But it was fun and human, and I'm not sure yet what the threads are, throughout all the discussions that we've had. But we're gonna reflect a bit next week and hopefully see what people have shared.
yeah, It's exciting. I don't know about you, but this year, obviously, we did learning tech. You were there too.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
energy in the in people events just feels to be a bit different this year, which is exciting. And I know there's
Hmm.
so much dominated talk around AI, but the human side really
Yeah.
is coming through,
Yes.
and it's exciting to see that.
Yeah, yeah, it was the same. It was the same for us. It was interesting. We did this pre-conference call just to get everyone, acquainted and make sure that they arrive with less anxiety, joining a new space. And so many people mentioned that they want to talk less about AI, because I think there's so much noise about it that, yeah, they want spaces where we talk about other things, like we're doing today, actually.
Yeah, good. I'm seeing we've got some people from Manchester, Belfast. I think someone's joined us from Mexico, which is great to see. London, Glasgow, Warwick, Burnley, everywhere, which is cool. Nobody's giving their mood, which was interesting. They're giving their location and their their weather, which is easy for us to do. Um, but no, it's great to have lots of people there, and good to see Irene. The mood is good, and amaze balls from Ruth. That's great to see. Please appreciate you sharing that. I believe we're in for a treat in the UK with a sunny bank holiday weekend. So hopefully everyone's feeling that energy of the sun and feeling positive in relation to that too. Um,
Yeah.
Look, I think probably based on where we are, and we've got a good chunk of people in. I know that probably some more people may be watching the recording and can't make it live. So it's probably good for us to make a start, Lavinia, if you're happy to. We've got lots to get through. We've got lots of really good questions that were shared across beforehand. And we're hoping to get even more, I guess, engagement from you all. If you haven't yet found the chat section, if you kind of hover on the bottom of the Zoom portal, you should see a little chat box. And if you click on that, it should open a window. We will be asking for your input, and throughout this session as well, we want to make it a discussion. Please do, chuck questions in, and we'll try to pick up as many as we can live. But if we don't pick them up, we'll try to pick them up afterwards and make sure that they're brought into the kind of follow up afterwards. Um, so yeah, look, a big welcome to everyone to a live episode of Mind the Gap. Our Mind the Gap podcast has been going for a little while now. What we're really trying to do is challenge the status quo, but also bring up key topics to bridge gaps both in L&D, business in general, organizational change, really to try and make sure that we all as a collective are pushing ourselves to deliver for our organizations, change how we think about things, and hopefully have a really good discussion overall. And that's really the focus of the Mind the Gap podcast. I'm really pleased and excited to be joined by Lavinia, who's the co-founder of Offbeat. Lavinia, I'll let you introduce yourself and share a little bit about you and what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, first of all. So I am Lavinia. I am joining you from Bucharest, Romania. And I, together with my colleague Ioana, we opened Offbeat, which is this space where L&D professionals come together to talk about their current challenges and their projects and experiments and learn from each other, but also think about what the future of L&D might look like, which is a question we're asking quite a lot these days with AI and all sorts of changes that we have in our industry. So yeah, that's what I do. Talk to L&D professionals all day. I was an L&D myself, so yeah, just love learning and all that we do.
Brilliant. Great to have you here, Lavinia. And just very quickly, I'm Harry, the CEO of Kallidus. 13 years in L&D now. Look, I think probably the key thing to say is I'm really passionate about how we prove the measurable impact of L&D and how L&D becomes this organizational value driver, and really focus on trying to build an organization here at Kallidus that just helps L&D do that. And so that's at the heart of everything we're thinking about at the moment. And it's great to be able to have these conversations, both with lots of people in L&D, but also yourself, Lavinia. I always come back with this kind of like, okay, how do we solve this problem now? Or there's these key themes, or this has been flagged, and how do we go and work on that? So it's always energizing and exciting. So I do appreciate it. So look, what I want to do first is just do a little bit of framing, and then what we'll do is we'll ask you to input some responses into the chat that we'll start to discuss. You very kindly shared a number of questions that we've actually bucketed into some key themes. There's probably too many to get through in the time that we have, but we'll do our best to get through a chunk. They're really good themes, though, and I think that Lavinia and I are excited to kind of delve into them. And then, as we said at the end, we'll open up to some more general Q&A, and we'll finish off the session together. But we do really want to make this a dialogue, and so please do contribute in the chat, and we'll do our best to engage as much as possible. So, look, the reality of the session today, the question we're holding for the next hour is the one I hope that every L&D leader has heard or is being challenged on, or I believe is probably the mandate that's out in the industry at the moment, even if it wasn't necessarily said out loud. And that is this idea of so what? So what happened? What actually changed because we invested in L&D this year? What's different about how a team performs, how maybe risk is reduced, how this person grew? And the hardest part, and I think the most challenging part, and the topic that we want to talk about is how do you prove it? For years, our function has reported on what's probably easy to count: completions, attendance, engagement scores, course volumes, and they absolutely prove effort. They prove participation. They prove that our functions in L&D are doing stuff. They're busy, doing hard work. But what we're saying, and I think the challenge that we're hearing is, well, what has actually changed? What actually has changed as a result of all that activity and that effort? And at Kallidus, we've actually given this a name. We've called it the activity trap. Um, it's the point where activity gets mistaken for effectiveness, where reporting focuses on what's easy to measure rather than what's meaningful, where learning looks kind of more busy and successful on the surface, but its impact on performance stays a little unclear. And that's ultimately what we want to change. And here's what I've personally come to believe, and I believe it's a bit of a shared view with Lavinia. Once we name a problem, we can own it. Once we can own it, we can do something about it. And that's what hopefully today is really about, and the conversation that we can have today. I'll be honest with you, I've already said some stuff that might feel a little bit uncomfortable, and that is really the idea of these sessions, to pull out some of that uncomfortableness. It is deliberate. I personally believe, and I hope you all, as growth-minded individuals in our space, is that the most meaningful learning sometimes comes from some of the uncomfortable moments, and the most constructive outcomes come from feeling that level of discomfort. And Lavinia and I aren't here to perform a reassurance session with you. We're here to have a real conversation. We're here to have a discussion, and hopefully, again, you can all challenge and get involved in that. And I hope you can agree that. And that's the reason that Mind the Gap exists. It's not a presentation, it's a live conversation. It's shaped by the questions you sent in. It's shaped by the dialogue that we have today. It's shaped by real people in the room, and that's what makes L&D so amazing. We're dealing with real people every single day, and that's what we need to talk about. So, as I said, we'll spend the next, whatever it is, 50-ish minutes together, hopefully, having a good conversation. In a moment, I'm going to put a question to you in the chat. I want your first emotional response that comes through. Don't overthink it. After that, Lavinia and I will work through the themes that we've talked about. As I said, there's lots of them. They're really good. We tried to bucket them together, and then we'll go into that kind of Q&A to finish. So first, let's start with hopefully everyone getting involved, as many as you can, and we'll start that conversation. In one word, can I get you to put into the chat, um, what do you think L&D struggles most to prove? Hopefully that gets everyone up. Nice. Okay, effectiveness. Wow. Two double effectiveness up front. Outcomes. Eric, I see you there. Good to see you. Outcomes, ROI, impact. Lavinia, can I ask you rather than me? I've done a lot of speaking there. Do you want to pick out one of those words and maybe you could just start to expand on it from your perspective?
Yeah, it's so interesting that I see between like impact, ROI, and effectiveness. I'm also seeing like emotional growth and things that are more about not necessarily, about the hard stuff, but about ourselves as human beings. So that's something that I spotted. But I think it's what I see everywhere and what we see also in our community. And I think it's a really hard question that unfortunately doesn't necessarily have a black and white answer. There are lots of grays in the middle. And what personally we struggled with were finding real case studies of L&Ds moving beyond activity metrics and actually showing that ROI, that impact, that effectiveness that people have shared in the chat. So it's very much what we're discussing in our community as well for a couple of years now.
Yeah, I think if I'm honest with you, if I was to pick out a number of words and I was to list them, I think that they'd be very similar to what we're hearing generally in conversations with customers as well. I'm really interested. They're not None of these are new words, are they? I think they've existed for a long time. That's the thing that I always come back to. It's like none of this is necessarily new to us. And this is where, again, where I think that we've got to come back to this idea of not reinventing the wheel around things.
Mhm.
A lot of these metrics probably already exist inside the business. It's not
Mhm.
about creating some new framework. It's not about creating some new metric or ROI calculation. It's probably a
Mhm.
number that already is being measured and trying to align behind it. That's probably a key part of the conversation today, isn't it? It's an interesting one. Um, it it's really interesting. Emotional growth and the human side coming through. One of the one of the things that probably often is most hard to kind of measure is in that element. Is there something that you've kind of discussed or experienced working with people or discussing in Offbeat in relation to that topic?
Yes, we are discussing it, but it's very, very hard. And what I would say is probably that the frameworks that we currently have available, or maybe the frameworks that we've been exposed to over like the past couple of decades, haven't shown their effectiveness in helping us measure effectiveness in any area, whether it's capability, acquisition, or performance impact, or yeah, even the emotional side of things. Yeah, it's a very hard conversation, and we are discussing it. No answers, no clear answers just yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that, ROI has clearly come up, impact's clearly come up,
Mm,
value has clearly come up as a kind of reoccurring theme. If we go to the kind of hard, business reality of proving value, one of the things that we've talked about a lot is kind of aligning behind this idea of the CFO language or the
mm,
the
mm-hmm,
concepts that already exist inside the business.
mm-hmm,
And we've narrowed actually to kind of four key pillars: risk, revenue, retention, and productivity. And
mm-hmm,
most of those have some fairly, I was going to say simple. They're not
mm-hmm,
always that easy, but they have fairly straightforward kind of calculations that can be time
mm-hmm,
saved. Obviously, reframing completion, metrics around
Hmm.
compliance against risk in terms of the way that
Hmm.
risk has been reduced, or and it's kind of this idea that a lot of what already exists in relation to the value that's
Yeah.
being created is out there, and the language just needs to be shifted slightly to the way that the business talks about it. And I know that
Hmm.
sounds a bit nuanced, but we'll talk a bit more maybe about that as we get into some of the themes. But I think there's this real opportunity where actually going and getting hold of some of those metrics that already exist inside the business and starting to hang your hat on one, maximum three of them at the start, not going
Hmm.
too broad and just saying we're going to go and try and impact and prove the impact of this. That's the way that I'm
Hmm.
thinking about measurement and impact and ROI when we're talking with customers.
Yeah, it's so interesting because one of the things that also come up in our community and the broader L&D community is what like we're measuring attendance and completion, but what other metrics should we add to like L&D's dashboard, right? And to your point, we're so aligned on this because I actually think that L&D's KPIs should be the business KPIs. I don't think we should be inventing new ones. Um, I think we should just go into and talking about aligning with the CFO. I would even expand that, and I would say that we should just go into the business and understand what they're measuring. And there are so many KPIs honestly across the board, everything from like revenue, customer service feedback, number of errors, time spent on different tasks. Employee or customer retention, new hire ramp up. So there are so many KPIs that are already out there. What I think it's hard is proving attribution. So how do we prove that whatever we're doing in L&D impacts those KPIs in one way or another? So what I've seen L&Ds do is map their current initiatives on existing KPIs. Then you can do things like, okay, look at the before and after an initiative. You can track a KPI over time in relation to your initiative. You can look at different cohorts of people, or honestly, even all of the above. And sorry, I started talking, and it's gonna be hard to shut me up now. But
No.
if we take like a real example, we know that leadership development should influence employee retention, right? You can just go in before launching a leadership development program. You can look at the status quo. What does the employee retention look like? Then you can run all sorts of initiatives and see if that specific KPI improves or moves in any way or another. After you run it, you can compare retention rates for different leaders. For example, you can compare retention rates for leaders who have gone through the program versus those who didn't. It can be in a specific department or across the company. So there are lots of things we can actually do with existing KPIs. And yeah, it's a very good point you're making.
Yeah, look, I think that probably leads us nicely in, and appreciate everyone contributing. Probably lead us nicely into going to the kind of meat of our discussion today. And we'd
Mhm.
love people to again contribute, comment, feedback in
Mhm.
relation to what's being said, challenge us, give thoughts, give experiences, give real life, examples if possible. It really helps kind of add value to the experience. So look, I think the first bucket then of these number of questions, I think there are probably four questions that fit into this bucket. And I've kind of given it a title. We don't know where to start. Like we don't know where to start. So people know completion isn't enough. But they don't know what to replace it with. And the questions sound like how do we begin a bit? A lot of them, like where do we begin? What do
Mhm.
we start with? Um, and I guess also maybe there's a little bit of an element of what felt like overwhelm is what some people feel
Mhm.
like there's so much that could be done, or there's an expectation of so much that can be done too. So yeah, we don't know where to start. It'd be good to get your thoughts, Lavinia, on where can we help shape people's thinking and where to
Mhm.
start.
I mean, looking at our history, what we've been looking for so far is like a framework that we can apply across the board for whatever initiative we're running. And I actually don't think that there is a one size fits all framework, which is also what makes the job so difficult. But if you think about it, all the initiatives we run, they are so different, and they all address so many different organizational gaps. So I think we've been failing a bit at this because we're trying to look for this framework, right? So in my opinion, or my first question would be, what are the top two, three programs, initiatives, call it however you want them, that are really important for business success? And it can be leadership development, it can be AI adoption, it can be a sales academy, whatever you know, it's really important for you. And then focus on that. Just focus on one thing at a time. Start gathering as much data as you can about that initiative. Again, it's okay. Gather your data, the activity data, but don't forget to go into the business and ask for their data as well. And then basically do exactly what I was saying. Just try and track that data, spot patterns, and you can build a case for one thing before you jump into other things that you might be able to measure. I think this piloting way of working, and it doesn't sound, because again, we're trying to measure everything we're doing, and there are so many stakeholders to please, and it doesn't sound like this approach doesn't sound like a way to please all stakeholders. But I don't think we should please all stakeholders. I think we should choose our bets, and build trust over time.
Yeah, no, I love a lot of those concepts. For me, it's a case of often what are you going to stop is the first conversation that you need to have either with yourself, your team, or maybe the business to give you the space to be able to do this work. And I have to say, I had a privileged position of working with our head of M&D inside our organization, and we're doing all this skills kind of development activity. What are we like? What does it actually link up to? What's the actual outcome it's focused on? And we then ended up linking back to four key pillars that were important for us. But we ended up ripping up and saying we're drawing lines through a lot of stuff and actually saying what do you
Mhm.
stop first that gives you that space to be able to do it.
Mhm.
One of the biggest things for me, and I'm only giving it, if you can give an example without giving the name of the customer away, but um, one of the key things that we've seen is identifying one thing that's very easily measurable, and often that can be time saved as a good example,
Mhm.
and you can put a
Mhm.
very hard metric against that, and you've then got a proof point. You've got something that's really measurable, and so in this example, actually came back to risk training for a care
Mhm.
sector, a large tens of thousand employees. So when you start to save 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours in terms of the amount of time you're actually delivering training around refresher training, other elements, you're starting to condense, obviously, the amount of cost associated with that whole practice. But you can start to put a pound, dollar, euro number against that, and that becomes very, physically measurable that can go back into, especially with frontline workers, I guess, back into care, back into actually doing the role that matters, or as this organization wanted to redeploy that time and effort into personal development and actually having
Mhm.
a framework and a pathway to improve retention. So every 1% retention improvement was around, I think, £400,000 to them. So
Mhm.
they had quite high churn, around 30%. I think Care has a challenging time with
Yeah.
this. So they were putting it into personal development, but they're also putting it into management development. And again, going back to that retention number, if you know what 1% equates to, can you align a program of development, for example, management development, upskilling around, one-to-ones, performance conversations, coaching? Does that start to have an impact on that churn reduction?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
what I'd say is go and take a metric or take a number and be like, we're going to put our name against it, and you have to have that ownership, accountability mentality about it. You have to go and say, I'm willing to go and put my neck on the line. Having a proof point, having one piece of data that you can go back to, a time saving, retention, a pound, dollar, euro, especially in for profits. If it's a time saving and a pound saved in not for profits, equally as valuable, and it still comes down in that revenue pillar in terms of the ones that we talked about at the start: risk, revenue, retention,
Hmm.
profitability. But that's where I kind of think about starting. It's almost like, what do we stop? You have to stop first. You have to then go and
Hmm.
be like, okay, let's narrow down to something that we know we can absolutely measure that is important,
Hmm.
that impact. And if it's time saving, that seems to be one that feels like in a lot of the business cases and ROI cases, we do an outcomes process with our customers where we build out these kind
Hmm.
of outcomes pillars. That time saving one is one that everyone's like, oh, it kind of is a light bulb moment. We say like we've got 1,000 employees, that actually equates to a lot of money saved if we manage to do
Hmm.
that. It's not a small number.
Hmm.
And sometimes you just have to kind of go through a process of identifying what that could look like. But yeah, that's for me uh, where we can possibly start. But it's difficult because you can go back to, and I think it needs to be supplemented with completions too. I don't know about you, Lavinia. Those activity
Hmm.
metrics are still important to have visibility of,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
I'll call them second tier metrics for me. You've got
Hmm.
to have
Hmm.
your first tier metric of the impact, and it's got to be measurable.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my God, I have so many thoughts to piggyback on everything that you just said. I will try and be very brief. Um, you mentioned something, and there's something about courage, because we know all our theory, we know completion rates and attendance rates are not enough. Sometimes we just need more courage to go back and push against our stakeholders who are honestly not always used to us demanding access to data or us asking like the really hard questions. They've been used with us, um yeah, almost saying yes to whatever they want to do. And we do require like courage to do the things that we know we should be doing. So that's one of the things that I kind of discovered with our community. The second thing that you said, which is so interesting, is that it's not, sometimes we look at measurement and we think that we need, better technology or better questions or whatever it is. And I think it's a combination of all of these. I think we do need good technology. We do need better processes as well, processes that are directly related to measurement, but other processes in L&D, and we can talk at length about that. We do need better questions. We do need better relationships with our stakeholders within the business and making sure that we co-create things with them and we don't, just do everything ourselves. Um, so yeah, again, many things that, that you said that I agree with.
And I think the other bit that I just add, I guess, is the the way that it's actually Hinchcliffe, who you obviously know. We were
Oh, yes.
talking about this idea that marketing has been going through this for years, where every
Mm,
single pound or dollar has to be justified with an ROI case, right? And they want like
yeah.
and and I think that having that kind of mentality of actually building ROI cases around a business outcome
Mhm.
is a structural shift for us, because we have been in a place in L&D where, and the technology has also supported this, where you're like, okay, build more courses, there's a course for that. Oh, we'll build a course for
Mhm.
that. Managers aren't able to do this thing. Oh, we'll build a course for that. But actually starting with the business outcome, the measurement at the front of it. And if you can't bounce it
Mhm.
against that. If you're like, okay, well, we're going to get a completion report at the end of this, and that's going to be the proof that everyone's done it, and that's it. That doesn't feel like my activity trap alarm bells kind of start going off. You need to be
Yeah.
like, I need to be able to say the so what, and I think that part that starts with understanding the ROI case. I Can I one last bit and we'll move on to the next one. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to get through them.
Yeah.
Keep talking about it. One other thing that I just wanted to say out loud and hopefully is helpful for people is hopefully you've got an executive team, a leadership team, or access to metrics, or you've got a CEO who's bought into L&D, and therefore hopefully you're working in a great organization that really values and understands the impact. But some of you may not have that, and some of you may not have access to it. And that I feel your pain because I think you're probably in a slightly harder uphill battle in relation to getting started effectively. But what I would say is go and pick one metric that you want to go and change and make that your proof point and make that your torch to go and say that this is the impact L&D is having. Um, the other bit is to say like again, this is difficult because it does mean coming out of, and this is probably the uncomfortable element that we're probably talking about, a bit like marketing, is putting your neck on the line for a metric and saying, I'm going to change this. I think is part of the mentality that we've got to start to have now. And look, it's not a case of going shoot for the stars and miss horrifically. It's a case of saying, I want to go and change this metric and I'm going to go after it and have ownership and buy-in and alignment behind it. But I think that just building that incrementally up and building those, that catalog of your, store outcome stories, your proof points. If it's in your organization and you're getting buy-in and people are getting excited about that, then you're doing an amazing job. But if you're not getting that, but you're still creating these proof points, hopefully it's something that you have in your portfolio of capability that you can take somewhere else that does value it and maybe does start to get excited about the impact L&D can have. So I think there are organizations out there seeing L&D and working in that way as a value driver inside organizations. Right. Should we keep going? Should we keep going? Otherwise, I could keep talking about that topic. And obviously, if there are any comments, questions, prompts, please do put them in. Um, Theme two, and I think there were another 3 to 4 questions that kind of bucketed into this. The key theme is the business is asking for the wrong things. So again, going back to the stakeholders really know what they want. So stakeholders demanding numbers without specifying what they actually want. Regulators interested in only ticks, so the tick box piece. Leadership stuck on happy sheets. A common thread that ultimately L&D is being asked to feed a system that doesn't actually serve
Mhm.
anyone, L&D, the
Mhm.
value that it can drive. Um, one of the strongest questions that jumps out is, are stakeholders asked for completion data because that's what they've always asked for? It's kind of that's the definition of insanity, isn't it? Doing the same thing the
Yeah.
same way. How do you change what they're asking for? Question mark. So yeah, I don't know whether you wanted to start us off, Lavinia. And again, other people, please do
Hmm.
jump in with anything that you feel relevant.
Yeah, yeah, and if you have experiences changing stakeholders' minds, yeah, this would be a really good moment to share those. I think this usually happens because stakeholders do have like a poor understanding of what an L&D department could and should do. And to your earlier point, I also think there might be in some organizations just a lack of real care for learning. And I think that's where like the uphill battle truly is. Um, if now I have so many thoughts, but one of the ways that I've seen companies treat learning would be like an engagement tool, right? Like if we give people access to training and access to content libraries, engagement will increase, hence productivity and retention will increase as well. And I have to say, and this is from personal experience, we did this exercise with my previous team where we basically tracked all the learning points that we were giving to employees and also who was interacting with those learning initiatives. And then we also looked at our engagement survey and what people were sharing there, and our retention rates over 2 years. I think we did. We tracked, and we couldn't make necessarily a case for engagement. I think there were a few people who had access to like lots and lots of qualitative learning where we could say that yes, they were staying with us because of that, but otherwise using learning just as an engagement tool, it's I don't think it's a good use of an L&D department, right? So I think that if we are to use learning as a performance gap closer, sorry, I'm missing my words here, but um, if we're to use learning to improve performance, we do need to work with our stakeholders. I think there's no way around it. I think that from the start, when a stakeholder comes to us and asks for whatever they're asking for, and everybody is asking for something from L&D, we need to try and understand exactly what they're looking to improve when it comes to performance, and then almost like co-create the entire process with them upfront before the design even starts, thinking about what are the metrics that we will be tracking. It can be one, it can be two, three metrics. When exactly are we going to track these metrics? What dashboards should we be looking at? Will we get access in L&D to that data? And what I always say is, if a stakeholder is not willing to work with you on this, what I would question is how important their request is, how urgent their request truly is.
Mm.
So, yeah, this is
No,
where I stand.
no, I love that. I love that, and I think it's that kind of it's that so what challenge. It's the bounce back. If they can't help you answer
Mhm.
what they're trying to achieve, what's the impact, then why am I going to spend loads of time
Yeah,
building it? And if they're not going to invest the time, um, we aren't. L&D is not an order taker. If you're in that
yeah,
order
mhm,
taker state, that's something we've got to
yeah,
be comfortable in. And again, maybe it feels uncomfortable to be able to push back and say, well, what does this actually do? What's the impact this is going to have? If I do this, what are you expecting? And also maybe to your point, not maybe, absolutely, how much time are you willing to invest in making this? How much of a priority is this? How much time are you willing to invest in making this happen? Um, but I think critical about the business is asking for the wrong things. I think the thing that I come back to is don't try to convince leadership to want better metrics. I think you've got to go and show
mhm,
them what better metrics look like.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then once you it's like the kind of, once you see what's possible, the
Mhm,
old kind of completion data starts to kind of disappear into the background and you're not necessarily as relevant anymore. And I think that's where for me, when we talk about the activity trap, this is the structural change. When the business asks the wrong I say wrong thing because it is what I guess when they're asking for the wrong thing, we have two choices. We keep delivering it and we just kind of carry on doing the same thing. And I think, as we said, I don't think that's the right thing. Or we have to reframe the conversation. And what you've just said is about reframing that conversation, isn't it?
mhm,
And I think some of the reframing is purely language as well. And I think this is the quickest and best win for L&D. I said it a bit earlier, is when you can start to reframe completion data to risk, for example. So rather
mhm,
than here's your completion data report, it's more about risk. This is your risk reduction data, and and then being able to frame actually what is that risk reduction. So does that mean that we are reducing insurance premiums? Does that mean we're reducing the amount of accidents? How are we actually reframing completion data to the risk problem? And I think there are a number of different elements. And I think there's just language change, even the tightening of reports, even the way that we're starting to put together whatever we're putting forward to our senior leadership team, board reporting. I think there's just a language shift that can actually really start to help frame this. And ultimately, if someone says, "Can I have a completion?" Sorry, if you said to a leader, "Do you want a completion report, or do you want me to show you how we're reducing risk?" What are they gonna
mhm.
how are they going to respond? They're going to ask for the second one, right? So I think there's just this
Yeah.
opportunity here in the way the language can be changed. Um,
Just so sorry to
no,
interrupt
no, no,
because
do. I'm talking too much. Go
I
for it.
wanna no no no
Get
I wanna
excited.
piggyback on some of the things that you said. First of all, um, I was talking to someone again. I talk to people smarter than me every day, and he gave me a frame of the difference between ROI and ROE, so return on expectations versus return on impact, right? On investment.
Yeah, yeah.
And what we've been doing so far quite a lot is return on expectations. We do deliver what people are expecting because they don't know what they don't know. But in really tough times, that doesn't help. People want help L&D, and we won't just keep our jobs because we were nice to people. We will keep our jobs and we will, have impact if we are willing to be challenging as well. And talking about the conference that we just had this week, someone said that what he had to do was reposition himself as like his core identity from a learning leader to a business leader, although he went into learning because he loves learning, but he realized that in order to have impact from a learning perspective, he needs to see himself first as a business leader. And I think that comes back to what you were just saying about language. It is about, I think it will be easier for us to have this language if we see ourselves as business leaders. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of like this. I don't know whether it feels, I don't know if this is old, but talent development versus learning and development, or changing the
Mm.
titling, or even just the
Yeah, yeah,
focus on development. For me, development aligns to performance. And I'm going to say
yeah.
something again that I hope isn't too challenging, but I believe that L&D should own performance. I find I find a dichotomous relationship between L&D sitting in one place and HR sitting in with it, sorry, L&D sitting within a team in HR, and performance potentially being managed somewhere completely separate. But learning and development
Yeah.
is development and performance are one and the same thing. So
Hmm.
it's yeah, it's a really interesting one. And even like even the title, and I hate this kind of I said this at LearnTech when I was doing another talk. I hate this idea that you have to call yourself a business partner in L&D and HR.
Mm.
Everyone's a business partner in
Yeah.
any other role, right? You're expected to partner with a business and have an impact. So why do we have to title a specific role to do that? I think that's,
Mm.
but maybe there's something about, how we think about reframing this and a bit of reinvention at a personal level. I I think I have people pleasing tendencies. I don't know whether L&D has that as well. Um, you like to giving good news is a nice thing, but actually you have to train yourself to go and have the difficult conversations. And one of the biggest things that I've learned in my career, and I had a very good experience where I got given direct feedback, and it was hard and it's tough, but it gave me the biggest leap. And I think that's something that we've all got to in L&D kind of believe in too.
Yes.
Should we have a look at there's some questions coming in.
Yes.
Agree with your thoughts on this. The challenge is balancing that, challenging the status quo and looking like you're stalling on progress or have that persona of not supporting the business. Yeah, that's that's really that's really interesting. I'll let you go first, Lavinia. I've talked. I've got some ideas on it myself in this.
Mm, sorry, I was just rereading
Yeah,
the
yeah.
sentence to make sure I understand it. I think so. Two thoughts that I have on this. First of all, I would say always rely on community when you feel like you feel a bit inadequate with what you're doing, because there again, when we're doing something that we're not used to, there is this feeling of we're not doing things right, and also when it feels like our stakeholders don't understand why we're suddenly asking for all of these things. I would always go back to community, to our L&D community, because we're all struggling with the same, and I think there's so much confidence and courage to gain from hearing other people's stories and that they're struggling with the same. That's one thought. The second thought, and I want to go back to something that you said, Harry, earlier, the fact that sometimes we just need to report on those activity metrics for other reasons. And I was talking to someone from Portugal a couple of years back, and what she shared is that for tax exemption purposes, they need to share number of hours per employees. So basically, they need to invest in training, so they have a tax cut, basically. So sometimes we just need to do that, and I would say automate the hell out of those reporting processes, so you get a chance to kind of run a second reporting stream in parallel on how we're doing things, not just what we're doing. Dan, I'm not sure if I'm answering your thoughts, but these are the things that come to mind. But Harry, go on. I think
Yeah,
you
no,
had
no.
some as well.
And I come with it a lens. Obviously, being a CEO of a business, I have to interact at a level where I want data, proof, and and metrics probably drive a large amount of the decision. You then have the nuance of actually what you're going to do. I would just say that if if you came to me and said, we're spending money on stuff that's not working, and I don't want to carry on doing that. I want to turn L&D into a value driver. I'm going to focus on these two things that I've identified from our strategy that you've said are really important. And you came and said that to me and validated that with me as a leader. I would be like, hell yeah, Dan, go after it. And then to probably Kate's point after, would love to hear thoughts about stakeholder buy-in and challenging culture that doesn't quite understand. I would just go and say, like, let's go and get a proof point. Go and bring me this kind of bring me a metric. Go and bring me something that you've changed as a leader. And it's really hard to question it. And I think you just have to. That's how I think that's in my mind. Um, Outside of obviously having those constructive conversations, I really like the idea, and I think it's really powerful. And obviously, it depends how long you've been in the role, how much of the existing structure, infrastructure, and learning infrastructure you've built, how much you've potentially been in this kind of more activity trap focus of building for people because they've asked for it versus challenging and trying to understand the outcomes. But drawing a line and saying I'm not going to do that anymore, and actually representing and reinventing ultimately what L&D is, I think that's a really powerful thing to do, aligned to the strategy of the business and aligned to the strategic outcomes. There's no If you can get a seat at the table and have that conversation and say this is what's not working and this is why and this is what we're going to focus on and this is why and these are the metrics we're going to change. I think that's just such a different type of conversation. And there's no harm in doing that because ultimately, what's the alternative? The alternative is you're going to sit there doing the same thing, possibly doing the same, getting the same outcomes with the
Mhm.
same perception in the business. And so I think we have to, it doesn't feel comfortable. Again, talking about that kind of
Mhm.
uncomfortableness, we have to sometimes just take ourselves out of that comfort zone. But I would say, look, as a CEO of a business, someone come and saying, I've proved a change, or I've owned this metric. That for me is exciting, and I'd be like, apart from the fact that I already believe in L&D as a value driver, I would be starting to go down that path. I don't know if that's helpful. There's some other good advice. I'm appreciating we're running out of time quickly. We've got through two of the themes. There's so many more. Should we try and go through a couple more and try and get
Yes,
in
yes,
a couple
let's do
more, go a
that.
little bit more rapid fire, and appreciate people contributing there. It's really helpful. Um, this is really interesting. Oh yeah, just go and measure everything. Don't worry about it, everyone. Just go and do it. We're just going and saying it. Very easy. Look, the reality is, some people are saying we can't measure what actually matters. Real impact versus ticks, culture and support that can't be reduced to numbers, compliance training versus incident reduction, long-term retention of learning. These are the most kind of consistent questions or the topics that are coming up. Someone specifically said, how do you measure things like culture, psychological safety, or coaching impact when the whole point is that they don't reduce to a number? And look, I think that I'll let
Mhm.
you go first. I'll get overexcited talking about it. Go on, Lavinia.
Um, Two thoughts about this. I have to acknowledge, we do have an obsession with putting numbers on everything. I don't, well, I have my guesses why, but I don't necessarily agree. I think there are numbers that you can put on psychological safety and coaching culture and learning culture and so on. What I think is that there's a lag between the moment you start acting on it and the moment that the ROI starts appearing. I think there's a long process, and we are a bit obsessed with seeing very quick results. And I think that's the harder challenge. How do we educate um, ourselves as a society to, that behavior change and that learning sometimes takes time? That's one of them. And the other thing is that I would personally always go back to qualitative data as well. There's If you have like a good number of qualitative inputs from people, that's also something you can share. Stories from your company. Those are even can resonate even more with some people. So why not use those? So again, I have more thoughts, but I want to let you share as well.
No, no, I think that's I think it's I appreciate you challenging the topic as well, saying I think there is, and I think that's the bit. This is the crux of kind of where we are in L&D at the moment, isn't it? It is this kind of point where I think the mandate and the challenge is being ramped by organizations and the leadership team to say we want to see more of this. And look, some of the data is going to be difficult to get, but I think we still have to go and get it. So I think instance is a good example in like manufacturing or any kind of frontline working, for
Mm,
example. That number is going to be reported by someone in compliance or some
mhm,
other health and safety department. We should be able to get hold of it, and if it's challenging, you've got to go and annoy someone enough to go and get that number. I think that's the expectation now. You can't. Um, Again, going back to what I said at the start, I guess we've got to get away from the framing of what's easy to measure, but what's most important to measure. And I think that's the key thing.
mm,
This is going to sound, I don't know if this is going to sound too blasé, but I think even the process of starting to say, I'm going to own the metric and I'm going to start to align some of the activity to a metric, you might not be able to actually prove all of the impact and the change in that metric, but actually, let's say you're doing a large amount of work around psychological safety, and you're going to say, actually, we're going to see an improvement on retention, or we're going to see an improvement on unwanted churn, or whatever it might be. And you can start to then align that behind the metric. I think that's part of this process. I think culture and support um, don't necessarily need to be reduced to completely defensible numbers as such, but I think they
mhm,
need to be linked to numbers that are relevant to them, and that's part of this process. You're not saying every single time, like every single thing that I do is going to change this number and I'm going to own this number completely, but I am going to go and change this number by the activity. And I think there's this kind of, it's slightly nuanced. I hope that's not kind of blurred the lines too much because I think there are some that we should be like, I'm going to change that number, I'm going to own it. And there are some that we're lining up behind. I think there's a credibility thing here in the way that we start to link these activities to outcomes, and it's what the right word is. It's a bit like what you said earlier. Naming the problem, you can then own it. Naming the
mhm,
metric, you can then own at least some of it, I think. And it's kind of like that
mhm,
process of saying, like, you know what the metric is you're going to change. I know that I'm having an impact. And if you're seeing it, you're then starting to say, is that, and the other part is obviously, is that metric important? Churn in a frontline worker environment costs organizations millions and millions of pounds. It's a really good one to go after.
mhm,
Is that management capability? Is that psychological safety? Is that poor one-to-ones communication,
mhm,
performance process and development process? How much of that can we train and support and put learning in to actually help? Look, is everything that we do going to be the reason that number changes? No, it could be a case of
mhm,
we're working on an amazing project, something really goes well, there's some
mhm,
environmental circumstances. Let's say we go into recession, no one starts to leave their jobs, but
mhm,
we'll go and start to own that metric and start to put our activity against it. I think that's part of the mentality shift. I don't know whether Lavinia, I'm
mhm.
oversimplifying it.
I don't think so. It's interesting that you're touching a bit on like that systemic thinking that we've in our community we're talking a lot about, trying to understand what exactly will influence a metric and first of all acknowledging, like you said, that we're not the only ones impacting that metric. I think the question is, can we attribute at least a percentage, how much we've helped? And you said something just a bit earlier about this idea of learning transfer and how hard it is. And I think what we need to be realistic about is that very little of actually what happens in a training will get applied in the like the real work. But I don't think what we need to do is just be very, very intentional about the way that we design learning to make sure that not necessarily we increase that percentage, but that most of what our trainings are about will help breach that performance gap if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. We've got 5 minutes left. We've got through not
Yes.
we've got through very few of the questions. There are ones on data access, there are ones on retention, there are ones on culture to retention, both learning and in terms of people. I think we've touched on it a bit already in terms of kind of conceptually. I wanted just to open up the floor to everyone in the last few minutes, just to ask any questions, put any points forward before we sadly have to come to a close. We need to do a whole afternoon of this, get a load of people into the room and have a really good discussion and start to open it up. It feels like you could go into it all day, really. Um, uh, if people want a whole afternoon, maybe that's something that we need to set up as an event. Um, but what have we got here? Anything coming through? Any questions from anyone that they want to share, or any feedback for us? Lavinia and I are always very open to it, constructive. Make sure you know if there's stuff that you didn't like or you don't think is useful for the industry, please do say. We're open to that. Um, appreciate that. Uh, we hope we can do more of this. And look, I think between us, Lavinia, both of our organisations, we're both focused on this topic. We're talking about how L&D can drive outcomes and deliver impact. Obviously, you're looking at it from very much a people and community perspective, which I think is brilliant, and having other like-minded people to be able to share with and engage with. We're looking at it in terms of how do we bring technology into the flow of work and be able to drive and support individuals in this process. And one of the things that we're really focused on is how do we get it so at point of need, you've identified a gap and then you can start to fill that gap, which I think is really interesting. And the dreaded AI words will come out, but it does help with that kind of potential to improve that kind of forgetting curve or fill that gap more effectively. Um, but look, if there aren't any specific questions, um, and 90 minutes. Appreciate that. Yeah, yeah. Please do connect with us, follow us. There's lots more content. Please follow Kallidus. There's lots more coming out. We'll be sharing some content off the back of this. I think it's probably a whole another session that we could do off the back of the questions that have been asked. But I think if you just go away from this session with one thing, I think the reality of what we're hearing, and I'm hearing from business leaders, is there's a mandate change for L&D to be this owner of business outcomes, to think about measurable impact. I hope we haven't made you feel too uncomfortable in the 60 minutes that we've had together, but there is meant to be this slight feeling of discomfort maybe in some of the topics that hopefully it's more like there's a change that needs to happen and that you're all up for it and you're excited about it because we certainly are, and that's what we want to engage with and want to support. And look, what we want to say is, look, we're in it together. We're all here trying to change the way that L&D is perceived in terms of its value, and hopefully everyone can buy into that and support that. And I think it's going to be a collective effort. So yeah, huge thank you for the questions that were submitted. A huge thank you to Lavinia for joining us from Bucharest. I know you're feeling tired. I think you said you're going to go and crash after this, having just done your own conference. And a huge thank you to everyone for joining in. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for having me.
No, I appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of your days, everyone. Hopefully the sun shines and hopefully the mood is a positive one. We'll speak to you soon. Take care.